Hello and welcome to the Oral Apothecary Podcast, authentic chat about medicines, pharmacy and healthcare in the UK.
Pharmacist Jamie, Gimmo and STC take on topical and controversial stories but keep it edgy yet light-hearted.
Pod guests share their career-defining drug, song and book and also share their joyful patient stories.
Welcome to the Oral Apothecary Podcast. My name is Jamie Hayes. For this episode, we're joined by Professor Mahendra G. Patel. Mahendra is a multi-award-winning pharmacist and academic. He's one of the national leads for the COVID-19 Principal and Panoramic trials. We will welcome Mahendra in a moment as he shares a drug for the Oral Apothecary Formulary, his career anthem, and recommends a book for our library. Our micro-discussion this week looks at the impact of unacceptable behaviours between healthcare workers on patient safety. So negative behaviour that violates the norms for mutual respect and includes rude, dismissive, aggressive and discourteous behaviour. Before we get too heavy, let me welcome my two fellow disruptors. STC is in Bournemouth and Gimmo is in Cardiff. Welcome both.
Evening, you were bowling that, Jamie. We could see you bowling that Yorker from a mile off.
Yeah, we didn't take it, did we?
Yeah, so evening, busy couple of weeks, hot as well. I had a story to tell about our number one fan. Remember who that is, Steve?
Your mum.
Exactly. So she's on holiday in Anglesey.
Not a Welsh podcast, mind you.
No. Well, they're from Skem, so they've gone over the border for their holiday, and she needs some help for various health reasons. And as it turned out, my dad needed some advice as well. So they did what I've trained them to do, and they went into a local community pharmacist. And mum, being my mum, she mentioned that we do the podcast, and guess what? It turns out that the community pharmacist who was there is a big fan of the show. So
of course they were.
I wanted to give a big shout out to Jenny White at the pharmacy in Rossniger, because actually the advice she gave was really helpful and my mum really appreciated it. So thank you, Jenny. And also thank you to Fiona from Bangor Medical School, I think you know, Jamie, who recommended the podcast to Jenny as part of their independent prescribing program.
Well, we're obviously getting out there, because we've had another message, haven't we, from Zayad Lakluk, I hope I said that correctly, who correctly picked me up. And apparently I said the word absolutely, which is a forbidden word, as you know, on the Oral Apothecary 3 times in the last episode. So I need to watch my P's and Q's.
You got it hung by your own petard there.
Yeah.
I was going to also, talking about social media, I was also going to say hello to, and again, apologies, Galib, if I've got this wrong, or Galib Khan, but he's sort of contacted us on Twitter for and pitched a podcast there. Do you remember last week, last episode, we talked about reaching out to people and pitching ideas? So keep them coming. But this one is about a podcast subject there about language and communication barriers and lack of accessibility around medication information. So that sounds right up our street. So thanks for the suggestion, Galib, and that'll be one for a future episode. How about you, Steve? What are you up to?
Well, I was just reflecting on the fact that this has been a week for some of our previous guests from the Oral Apothecary who've been very much in the news this week. So that's Dr. Mark Porter and Dr. Louise Newson, if you remember. And it's all really kicked off because it's been not just on Twitter, but in good old-fashioned print mail, the comments made by Professor Stephen Powis, who's the medical director for NHS England, who I think may have been slightly misquoted, but was saying about, look, maybe slightly seen to be criticising GPs about the pill for every ill, because it's about this, over-prescribing, which we talk about a lot. And obviously it's a complex area and you can't really criticise one particular part of the profession. And Mark Porter came out with a fantastic riposte, actually, in an article in the Times, basically saying, we get that, but remember that, and remember Karen Sankey, previous guest, saying, you feel under pressure to do something. So if you're waiting to have your knee operated on, or, you've got a mental health issue and the difficulty of getting into the queue to have your knee done or to go through CBT, etc., it's somewhat easier and you feel under pressure to do something. So before you start pointing fingers, realise that there's a very complex system there. And Louise Newson also got slightly tangled up in it because people, again, were talking about HRT, and there was some stuff in the news as well about, should we be giving HRT, not that we are, but should we be offering it to everybody for as long as they want it without individualising treatment? So it all got sort of swept along with the pill for every ill. So that's what we talk about a lot on this podcast, isn't it?
It was a good answer, wasn't it, for Mark? It was textbook, really. He did talk about the same sort of things when he was on the show, but it was, the balance that GPs have to strike between having the patient in front of them and needing to do something in a broken service. Didn't you use it as another excuse to have a go at single organologist, Steve?
Yeah, I did, absolutely. Because I said, well, maybe...
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, I've said it. There we go. We're 5 minutes in. I said, well, perhaps Stephen Powers can get his single organologist colleagues to be more accurate when conveying the brand message. Listeners will remember that. That's benefits, risks, alternatives, and nothing with their patients. And instead of, they need to say these pills may reduce your risk of ill X, not prevent it. And therefore, it's your choice. What do you want to do? Yeah, I never miss an opportunity to go on about that, do I?
Indeed, you don't. Let me take you back, Gimmo. Is it Fionn or Fiona up in North Wales? I think it might be Fionn, isn't it?
I'm getting it second hand, so I don't know.
Yeah, okay. So we apologise. And I've got a feeling it might be Fionn. So hi, Fiona and Fionn. I'm sure there's a Fiona in North Wales listening to us as well.
Is that Welsh for Fiona, Fionn?
Oh, don't go there. Okay, look, last week I was invited to give the vote of thanks at Cardiff Business Club, okay? The guest speaker was Professor Sir Chris Evans. He's a biotech entrepreneur. Look him up if you've never heard of him, but he told his story of how his love of science started with a chemistry set at the age of 7. And I mean, his career, he started multiple biotech companies that are worth over $7 billion now around the world. But his story of how he invented surfactant. Remember surfactant, for our preterm babies all around the premature babies all around the world. In the late 1980s, he used cabbages, eggs, and alcohol to develop his phospholipids that went on to become surfactant. So cabbages, eggs, and alcohol, who knew? Anyway, as part of my vote of thanks, I shared with the audience the suggestion that Sir Chris had a high impact career. And so when I'm with my coaching clients, I often ask them the question, what would a high impact career look like for you? And so that seamlessly brings us on, look what I've done there, to our guest for tonight. Because when you meet our guest, you realize that, and I described him as a national treasure at the end of our last episode, it's our great pleasure to welcome Professor Mahendra G. Patel to the Oral Apothecary. Mahendra has a vast biography with numerous awards and honours. Here's a very brief snapshot for you. The rest will be on our show notes. He's a multi-award winning pharmacist and academic with professional roles in pharmacy at a number of universities, including Bradford, Birmingham City, Sussex, Bolton, in the States and in Malaysia as well. He's led national work on type 2 diabetes and has advised the British Heart Foundation. He's currently one of the national leads at the University of Oxford for the largest interventional clinical trials in COVID, Principal and Panoramic. He's an active member of the South Asian Health Foundation. Internationally as well, he's worked extensively with the Indian pharmacy profession and became the first to be appointed International Fellow of the Indian Pharmaceutical Association. And he was awarded the OBE in this year's New Year's Honours List. Welcome, Mahendra. What's it like being a national treasure and what's on your agenda?
Well, I don't know about a national treasure, but I think where I'd like to start off is I wish I was a treasurer within my own household here, really, because I don't think they see me as a national treasure. So I've got lots of ground to cover, I think. What's on my agenda? Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really nervous. It's my second podcast, but first on here, and you've introduced me to something, I don't have many things going outside work and charity and trying to keep community balance and the family and everybody happy, is that you've given me a tangent here to look into. And possibly it looks like that I'm going to be a long-standing fan of yours for the Oral Apothecary, and real pleasure and honour. And I am nervous, to say the least, really, because how do you prepare for this? I don't know how you prepare for this. So what have I got on my plate? Well, I think we've got similar things, I suppose, for many that I could echo. I've got health things going on, partly because I had COVID about 3 months ago and realised I've now got long COVID symptoms, which is very embarrassing at times, with brain fog and coughing and fatigue coming in, which I can't tell when it's going to happen. And they don't all come together neither, really, believe it or not. It's all in separate parts. So going to hospitals, getting bloods, getting tests, all that, keeping working. And then I've got the trials of COVID. We've got the results of the Panoramic trial coming out soon, very shortly, on the molnupiravir, the antiviral drug for treatment of COVID-19 in the community. And those results, obviously, that particular arm has stopped now. But then I'm presenting on Monday in Brighton, which I've never ever been to Brighton. So I'm looking forward to that, at the prestigious Victor Horsley series of scientific lectures for the BMA there. I think I've been told historically the first time a pharmacist has ever been invited to present there. And then the week after, I'm at, of all places, Stamford Bridge, Chelsea Football Ground, presenting at the British Gynecological Cancer Society's annual conference. So those are the sort of things that I'm doing at the moment, but and then continuing with my daily work.
Mahendra, you're a very busy man, aren't you? I'm sorry to hear that you've got long COVID. I can't remember, we had somebody on once before and we were saying there's a horrible irony sometimes, isn't there, in that you've got heavily involved in a thing, like all the COVID, and then you end up with quite a nasty bit of COVID, I suppose, and end up with long COVID. But I was going to ask you about, and obviously I'm not expecting you to break the news because it probably is going to come out next week, but my interest, I suppose, in the whole antivirals in COVID is that a lot of people say, don't they, well, normally in an evidence-based medicine world, we'd like to see it in a peer-reviewed journal, and then we'd like to, other academics and researchers to look at it. And we've been, during the pandemic, haven't we? We've all perhaps not had all the information. It's come out as a press release or whatever. But the antivirals are interesting, aren't they? Because they looked fantastic. But of course, they were all in unvaccinated people. So I am genuinely fascinated to know, and I won't tell you what I think because I'm always slightly skeptical as to whether they'll be anywhere near as effective in vaccinated people.
Well, that's a very good point, really. And I'll be honest, we don't know neither because it's independently analysed and put forward. So we don't have any idea of how it will go. But if it does go in a positive direction, then obviously we'll be the first to look at and rolling it out to people who are most susceptible and more vulnerable to COVID-19, really, people with underlying health conditions, for example. So, and as we know, we haven't buried the hatchet with COVID-19, as you see cases still creeping up now, and with the autumn season soon round the corner after we get summer, hopefully not very quickly, and therefore we need to be prepared. But we know that the beauty is we have got a platform now that protects the public. We've got the vaccines, we've got the testing, we've got the drugs in place as well. So we are building that up. And wouldn't it be great that if we manage to find something that is simple to take by mouth, like molnupiravir, that could be rolled out to those most in need, clinically vulnerable, as quickly as possible, which is a simple 5-day course, just like taking a course of antibiotics, then that would be great. But the evidence, you're talking peer-reviewed papers, but every time we produce the evidence, it is going into very highly esteemed peer-reviewed papers. So if you look at the principal trial, which was using repurposed medicines, things like budesonide, which is used commonly for COPD and treatment of asthma, and those have been in very prestigious journals like The Lancet, etc. Really, I'm sure that we will be putting the outputs of this trial arm in very prestigious journals as well. Because if you look at it, when you've got 28,000 recruitees in 4 months, I mean, that alone, the pace and the speed at which everybody, the listeners, UK-wide have helped to get to where we are, then that's never, ever been, that's unprecedented, it's historic, at the pace and the rate and the reach that we've had. Isn't that great for the UK and how we can do trials, really? And this sets the tone for research in future, and perhaps even the networks and the pharmacy angle, obviously as a pharmacist, but the pharmacy networks and everybody else throughout that, be it community organisations, health organisations, the general public, they've actually stepped up the mark and helped to get to that milestone, really. So, the world's eyes were on this trial, as Chris Whitty, Chris Butler, and everybody else and team are saying, really. So fingers crossed very soon.
Working where I do, they've just sort of, after stopping the use of masks less than a month ago, I think they've just reintroduced them. So I think if something does come along, it couldn't come along quick enough.
That's the Jubilee effect, that is.
Well, that's what they're saying, isn't it?
That's Jubilee COVID.
I'm not sure they celebrated it that much in Wales. I don't know, but maybe that's controversial.
Controversial.
So what I was going to say is, has COVID maybe changed how we're doing clinical studies and trials? Because obviously, because of the urgency, there's a rapidity to how we fast track vaccines, how we did some of the research. I wondered if that's having a knock-on effect in general, making us realize that we can do some of these things a bit quicker without any loss in quality if we just cut out some of the, chaff or make the processes more efficient.
I think that's a good point, really. I think, sometimes are we caught down in the bureaucracy of things, and COVID has made us really get our act together in more ways than one. You've seen the vaccine trials as well. And it is that urgent priority that the government have stressed and made these trials as well, really, as a public health trial. And I think the other thing, if you look at it, is it has changed the face of research, because this is where the patient doesn't have to go to the GP surgery. They don't have to go into a trial unit. This is where the medication, the drugs that are being researched, and I'm not going to use the word tested because people think they're guinea pigs, but the drugs that we've been establishing and looking if they've got any value is brought to people's homes in the chairs that I'm sitting in the chairs that you're sitting in, without any inconvenience to them, really. And is this the way that trials can take part? And I think the other part is, if you look at the corners of involvement, the engagement from medical professions to nursing professions to pharmacy professions, healthcare professions up and down the country, community organisations, places of worship, community centres, university institutions, etc., all getting in, behind to try to help engage with the research, has been amazing. And I've got to say thank you. It's not about those people that are getting the drug, but also those people who haven't, because this has been compared with standard care, which is what would happen if you didn't have the drug, which is where we normally lie at this moment in time, is they have also helped and they've played a part in trying to find something as an effective treatment for COVID-19, really. So whether you've had the drug or whether you've just been on the standard care arm, you have helped to help get the results that hopefully we're all wanting to see, that will have a positive effect, really. So yes, it has changed. And I think it's changed for future research, not just for COVID research, but research in the community, in primary care, where we're often just pushing people, trying to get to people, look, this is a research. And within some communities, interestingly, they actually don't want to engage, really, because, no, now you want us, you want to put us as guinea pigs. No, you really want us now, don't you? And they're actually coming forward. When you see the data, they actually want to come forward. They want to help. They also want to play their part, but they also want to get better quickly as well and play their part for not just their loved ones, but people around the world as well. So there's a lot of takeaways from this in many ways, and the platform trial has allowed to do that. Undoubtedly,
in primary care, the ability, one of the things that came very much because of COVID was how easy it is using things like a company called AccuRx, where I literally, talking to a patient now as if I was talking to you on the phone, I could send you a message right now to your mobile while I'm talking to you, and it would say, if you want to enter into the trial, go here. And so it was so easy. So you're right, there's been a massive improvement in the way that we're able to do things. And we've got to take the positives from that, haven't we?
Absolutely. And I think this is...
You can't say absolutely, Mahendra.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, you can. You've already said amazing, so that's all right.
Yeah. Oh, is that banned as well? Yes, you're correct on that. And this is where my COVID brain fog has come in. I can't remember what you said there. This is a clear example of why I get very frustrated that I was presenting last month at the Excel, and somebody asked me a question. I said, I can't remember what you said. So
no, that's okay. We can edit that bit, because you answered my question. I was saying about in primary care, I can send you a text message and you can enter the trial via the website immediately almost. Go on, Joe.
Very quickly, Mahendra, what about your international work? Just to give us a quick flavour of how does that work with all those international associations that you have?
It's all on Zoom, right?
Well, the first year of the pandemic, that was really heavy because I was doing everything on, obviously we were all doing everything on Zoom. And interestingly, I was presenting in various parts of the world, Kenya, America, Malaysia, India, and Europe, Portugal, etc. But the time difference caught me out there, because I was supposed to present in India and it said 10:30 in the morning. And for some reason, that was one that I thought 10:30 UK time. Me being last minute Larry, I'll do my slides earlier on, just looked through the night before, and I thought, oh my God, 10:30, it's not UK time, it's Indian time, which meant that I had to be there for 4:00 in the morning. I didn't leave me much time for prep, so I was, anyway. So how has it worked? So that's part of that. I did a lot with World Pharmacist Day, where I hopped around, I think 4 or 5 countries in one day, sharing some of the work around antimicrobial resistance. Still working all around the COVID on presenting what we've done here as well, really. My work with UNESCO as a teaching faculty member, with a lot of webinars on there to various people from across the world, really, around the bioethics around COVID and how, some of the issues that, how does pharmacy play a part in that? And we even produce a toolkit as a result of that. So managed to get the pharmacy pieces on there. Then the work in America, again, as you know, America 5 or 6 hours or even 6 hours behind us. So that was the last on the list. So that was about 6 o'clock my time, 7 o'clock in the evening when I was presenting there. And my work with the American University there as well, really, where I got all the students and the staff together about antimicrobial resistance and looking at what, how we can get champions together, really, antibiotic guardians, which is something that I present in India in various parts of the country. One of the big takes was that just January 2020, I'd come back on as the pandemic was COVID was about to strike, and I knew there was a little bit of murmur at the time. I'd present in India a 3 or 4 day presentation, different parts of India. I was hopping on planes like we hop on buses and trains really here, because India is so vast. This is interesting, really. Antibiotic guardians to reduce antimicrobial resistance, the antibiotics that we take on a regular basis, we all know about it. We often, take them too freely at times, I feel, or ask for them too freely. And India being a real haven for excessive use of antibiotics and adding to that big pot of antimicrobial resistance, which is a global burden. I think from 2015, the antibiotic guardians, India had 350 antibiotic guardians up to 2020. And then when I present in three or 4 days, we managed to get it up to 4,000 antibiotic guardians in different universities through different programs up in various parts of the country. So that's the sort of thing: COVID, antibiotics, antimicrobial resistance, the ethics and the dilemmas that we've faced, general public has faced. Where does pharmacy come into that? Where do healthcare professionals come into that? That becomes part of the UNESCO work as well.
Very good.
So Mahendra, it's actually been a really refreshing change, because since we started the podcast, we actually, generally speaking, avoided talking about COVID, because at the time, everyone was right in the middle of it. So I think this is the first time that we've spoken a lot about COVID. So it's been really great to have you on, actually, to get your angle, as you say, on what has been a world-changing couple of years, let's be honest. And so, yeah, if research methods move forward as a consequence of that, then that would be a good thing.
I'm thinking you should get a T-shirt there, Mahendra, for I presented to 6 continents or something in one day. I'm sure that can be arranged or something like that.
We'll put it in the merch shop.
Just needed to go to Antarctica for the full house.
The Oral Apothecary is sponsored by Jamie Hayes Executive Coaching and onelesspill.com.
Yeah, that's true. Right. Okay. So, Mahendra, one of the pleasures of being a guest on the Oral Apothecary is you get to give a few things. And the first one, we're currently working on a new name for this, but I'm going to give you a choice. You can either call it an affinity pill or a memory medicine today, but it's essentially a drug that evokes a powerful memory for you. So what would you like to give us for the Oral Apothecary formulary?
Well, I was on strict warnings that I can only choose one.
Yeah.
But me being me, and we Indians sometimes have this trait that, try and get as much as you can, really. So I was going to try and get, but I wouldn't get one free time.
Jamie won't allow you.
Oh, well, I was under strict warning, so... But anyway, so I had a dilemma, but whether if it was going to be paracetamol, which, and I'll explain why, and the other one was going to be simvastatin. And I still don't know, because paracetamol gave me a lot of learning. I shared that learning as an academic through the student cohort and through my work at the university as well, because of where I've used it as well, really. And I think through my international travels, how underrated paracetamol is. So that's where I felt, but also I had some, a real story behind it from a personal perspective in using paracetamol on a family member that was a patient on a long-term basis. That really impacted on me, but how I could help change practice for others when it comes to them learning about medicines, and getting better. The simvastatin was a drug because, you know what, gentlemen, And I had to think about this because that almost put me to where I am today following my academic pursuits, because it was around health inequalities, which is my real passion, the inverse care law, the Tudor heart care law that was mentioned by Lucy Pollock as well, really. And you've mentioned it on your podcast often, is those people that need it most don't always get it. Not only don't always get it, do they get enough of it? And that's coming from the very heart of Bradford, where the inequalities are quite stark in terms of health. It was at a time when simvastatin was a breakthrough drug with the 4S trial, the Scandinavian trial with 4,000 patients, proving to be effective for secondary prevention of heart disease. And at that time, Bradford had, in one of the most deprived wards, the highest rates of coronary heart disease in Europe. And that was something that I'd homed in on. And through that, I looked at the data of the number of medicines prescribed for prevention according to the most deprived areas in Bradford. Bradford, I think, is the 7th largest city in the country. It's a very large city, but also according to one's ethnicity, which had never been done before. And that was then, my first paper was published in the BMJ, really. So I was doing my PhD and I thought, oh, that's me home and dry. And it took me a couple of years just to write up the blooming thing after that, thinking, oh, I'm going to be BMJ. No, I did, says he with tongue in cheek. So, and that was measuring the amount of statins that was prescribed per practice according to their deprivations area and people and their ethnicity for each of the practices in the Bradford district with those that had consented. So that then led me on to moving on to my journey from going into NICE to going into wider for South Asian Health Foundation, the British Heart Foundation, Preventing Heart Disease, etc., etc. People have said, why do you work for the Heart Foundation? Have you got family history of heart disease? Well, I haven't. I'm blessed. So you often get these specialities thinking, well, it's because you've been inflicted, but I don't have any of that. Neither did any of my family. I'm very blessed from that perspective. But I could see that health inequality. So is it going to be simvastatin, the 4S trial that's brought me to where I am from an academic perspective? Or is it going to be paracetamol, which actually brought me so much learning? And I'm always one about fighting for the underdog. And I think it's such an underrated drug, really. So
got to pick one.
I think the people of Bradford edge that.
Yeah.
Me too.
I was going to say, I've been to a couple of talks back in the day on health inequalities and the inverse care law. And actually, I've seen them use, and it may even been your work, Mahendra, but I've seen them use the prescribing of statins as it is a proxy indicator for the inverse care law. And I can remember seeing one for Birmingham, and I think, do they call it the Birmingham donut or something like that?
Yeah.
Am I right in saying that the centre of Birmingham is where it's less well off, and you've got the sort of more affluent areas on the outskirts? And so when you have a heat map of heart disease, it's all in the centre, and so you've got the whole of the donut. And then when you do a heat map of statin prescribing, it's all on the outskirts. And so it's a really good, using prescribing data, a really good visual indicator, nice and easy to do, of the inverse care law.
You're a top man, Gimmo, because that's exactly my paper, really.
It's been said before.
Don't come on this podcast and start spreading stuff like that, man.
Can I just say, it is not just thrown together.
Is that your paper, the Birmingham donut?
You guys know what you're talking about. You really do. So listen, I'll parallel the Birmingham donut, which is the Bradford Polo mint effect.
Maybe it was the Bradford Polo mint then. Maybe I'm confusing them in my head.
That was what I phrased, because in the centre of Bradford nothing happens, and this was in those days. I'm talking 1997 data. And on the periphery and the more affluent, the white areas, you've got all the preventative medicines going out, etc., etc. So you have got a real example of the inverse care law in practice there. So therefore, in the inner city, highest rates of heart disease, highly deprived areas, largest concentration of ethnic minority communities, and you've got the least prescribing of statins. That was a whole year's data that I analysed. And it showed that practices where there was a high rate of ethnic minority South Asian communities were least likely, 50% least likely to be prescribed a statin for the prevention of heart disease, secondary prevention of heart disease. one practice, and I can't say, I mean, it was such an extreme outlier that we had to throw it out of the paper, had no prescribing of statin with nearly 99% patients of South Asian origin. Perhaps there was no CHD heart disease in that practice. However, looking at the prevalence of heart disease among South Asian population, twice more likely to die from heart disease, heart attacks. There was no prescribing. So these are the sort of things that really made me, it got me interested and really made me think, we can make a difference here. And it is that Polo effect.
I think you've definitely got to go for simvastatin. That's a great story, and your passion for it.
And if only one of us had a story about the inverse K law meeting Julian Tudor Hart, but I best we get a move on, Steve.
I think we better move on.
Your loss.
We'll have to do a separate episode on it, and we'll have to get Mahendra back on, I think. I was going to say, honestly, Mahendra, how far further forward do you think we are, from the late 90s to now? Give it to me in a, are we 25% better than we were, or are we less than that, or, in relation to the inequality access?
Well, if you look at the latest data, 2020 is what I was thinking about. And I'm just thinking off the top of my head because I presented this data, that what I did was I started off presenting the 97 data. This is what we had in 97, 50% more likely to die of heart disease if you're of South Asian origin. If you look at the latest health observatory data from the Health and Race Observatory, you find that that's still the same, really. So people of ethnic minority origin. So how far are we? We've still moved on. Less people are dying, but I think that inequality, it has still need to be addressed. And I think this is where it gets exciting, that we can do something about it as well, really.
Oh, well, that means to prolong the conversation, but Michael Marmot is saying that it's getting worse, isn't he, in terms of the gap between the rich and the poor in particular?
Okay. Great. Well, Mahendra, the other pleasure is to give a career anthem for the All Apothecary Spotify playlist. So what are you going to give us for this?
Well, again, being of Indian origin, I was going to give you two choices, but I'm going to go for one here because I know you're going to whip me off the time, really. This might put your viewers off completely, really, because that's why I had to think twice. I don't know if Jamie knows what I'm going to talk about. It is marching on together for Leeds United, really. I'm a Leeds boy, everybody knows how fanatical I am about Leeds and passionate, having been a season ticket holder as far as I can remember and watching Leeds since I was about 14, 15. But you know what, joking aside, what does that marching on together mean? It means working together, we love you, and we can do it, really. And that's the key thing. But when I go to Ellen Road on a Saturday afternoon, can win or lose, when I start that, I always record the anthem because it gives me a buzz. I'm away from it all. I'm in my own element here, and I actually stand there before I get to my seat and record the anthem, really. And that is something that gives me some space, some freedom, and I feel it's very different that people, my colleagues, my friends, all know my passion for Leeds United, but I didn't know whether if I'd be brave enough to tell you on this programme, really.
No, well, listen, Jamie always said at the beginning that we're looking for honesty, and that is very honest. And we haven't had, as far as I'm aware, a football tune, have we? I'm not aware of that, but I've just looked, and it's by somebody called Shadow Lark. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And perhaps, you know what, if you really want it, I can add a little part to it at the end of this.
What, you're going to do a sing-along?
Yeah, I'm going to do a sing-along. Marching on together, #MOT.
Well, you'll make a few listeners happy. I've got a very good friend of mine called David Healy who's listened to every single episode, and he's a massive Leeds fan, so he's going to know what you're talking about, even if I don't. And so that's great. That's good honesty, and we're looking for different pieces of music that mean something, so you can definitely have that. Okay, and the last thing is a book for the Oral Apothecary Library. What would you like to recommend to the listener?
Well, I'll be really honest, and because this is an honest platform,
yeah, it is.
Reading has sort of gone by recently with all the work that we do, and working from home, we don't have an end point, really, because it's start to finish, and you're cooked up in a room, and you're zooming from 8 o'clock in the morning to perhaps 8, 9 o'clock in the evening, and that's not just me, but many others are as well. So I think it's lost that side of it. But so I can't remember much, but what does really come to mind without thinking too far into other, it was a forerunner for me, quite clear. is A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth, really. That is one of the longest novels going. I like it because it reminds me of my own ethnic origin, my background, my own, upbringing in terms of, this is about a young boy that his mother wants, shows him, this girl shows her 4 different boys as suitable candidates. And then there's a conflict between religion, Hindus, Muslims, class. It just goes to show we talk about being equal today. We talk about being equal and fair more than ever before. And yet it's not just the prejudices in the Western world, but the prejudices also occur in other countries, such as the Southeast Asian subcontinent, such as India after the British Raj. If you come from a low-class family, then is my daughter going to be good enough for you? If it's a different religion, if you're a Muslim, then how is that going to fit farewell? How am I going to tell the parents? And it's all those things, which brings me to where I am today, because I'm now advising at the highest level around inclusion, diversity and equality, both at NHS England, both from a professional perspective, and both at Oxford, and even at Oxford really is where that work is, around making sure that we're on a fair, equal platform. But even today, on a serious note, how careful we have to be in terms of our P's and Q's and what we're saying, and thinking 100 times, is this going to offend really? So for me, that sort of brings it home, but it's so well written. And there's even been a BBC program around it in series, and the costumery and the pomp and the arrogance. It really makes me think, well, you Indians can be racist and prejudiced as well, really. It's not just people who have white background that can be like that. So get real. But yeah, but I'm an Indian, so we have. It's that prejudice that we have within us.
Okay, so A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth. And with a bit of luck, never met you before, Mahendra, I really would like to think that you're going to see... Oh, no, Jamie's not going to be there, but I'm going to the first day of the England versus India first test at Edgbaston next Friday. So if you're there, I'd quite like to meet up. That would be great.
That'd be great.
Well, look, Mahendra, I can just confirm that you got your 3 choices correct. So, well done. Full marks.
3 great picks.
I've had A Suitable Boy on my... I mentioned my mum earlier. My mum bought it me because she read it and said it was fantastic, and she said I must read it. And it's been on the shelf for years because it is huge. It is huge.
Well, bigger than War and Peace.
Well, I don't know. It's
a parallel.
It's up there.
Very good. Okay, our micro discussion next. Look, a slight tangent for this week. It's an editorial from BMJ Quality and Safety. It's by the Bambergers, Ellen and Peter from Israel. Not sure if what their connection to each other is, whether they're brother and sister, husband and wife, or father and daughter.
Let's not guess.
Yeah, okay. And they're commenting on a systematic review in the same journal. It looks at the impact of unacceptable behaviour between healthcare workers and the impact that has on clinical performance. And so what do they mean by unacceptable behaviour? Well, I said at the start, look, it was negative behaviour that violates the norms for mutual respect and includes rude, dismissive, aggressive and discourteous behaviour. So do those type of things, A, do they happen in our healthcare system?
Yes.
Thank you. And was it A? Yes, it was. So B. So B.
He comes after A.
Do they have an impact? Do they have an impact? And so their editorial is, it's not easy to read, their editorial, but it's on a very important subject. And I suppose let's bring this on to a medicines and a medicines feel, is when you introduce medicines, poisons, some of them are, depending on the dose we use. When you introduce them into a system that has got people fighting, bullying, having to deal with unacceptable behavior, then the impact that has on the system can be profound. And so when our teamwork falls down in healthcare, the effects can be quite dramatic. And we'll all be aware of, scandal after scandal where relationships have broken down, and that has had a huge impact on clinical care and mortality. So who would like us to kick us off? Mahendra, did you have a chance to read it?
Yes, I did have a chance to read it. And I totally agree with you, Jamie, that I found this a really interesting paper, bit of a difficult read to some extent on first read, but I did like it. And I think it brought out some interesting points. So it's as if we as colleagues, as healthcare professionals, are being abusive or rude to ourselves. It's that workplace environment that we all know. It's not necessarily in a workplace, healthcare setting. It happens in all settings. I think that's the thing here. But what this paper is trying to show is that the systematic review around the issues around medication errors, the potential difficulties in making medicines choices, and care for patients, but also the collateral damage that it has on as well, really. And you know, they talk about the thing is it's unacceptable in terms of not just the clinical and patient safety implications, but more around the impact on the individual performance of third-party healthcare professionals just witnessing that behaviour. And I think we've all been in that situation where we witness a spout and we think, hold on, I don't really like this, I'm not really comfortable with this. But do we then take it away and actually practice that somewhere else unconsciously, and that becomes part of a culture? I think that's the other side. And I think the other side is that, does it bring, you know, it's almost, they've called it a contagion theory, where does it spiral upwards, where, you know, this is the culture and we continue to bring it up and up and up. And who actually then suffers at the end of it is that patient and the patient care, really. And I really did like this because it's looking at the wider psychological aspects of that. How can we put that into practice in terms of how can we remedy that? And is it just, you know, reflective practice, psychological practice, computerized interventions, is evaluating that we need to look at. How do we nip that in the bud, really? So, and also, it's not just the individual, but how does it reflect on the team as well? Because it can destroy the team performance in terms of comprising victims and of the witnesses to healthcare workers, their unacceptable behaviour. So I think, you know, it's the individuals, the victims, the teams, and also the effect, the wider effect that it can have in terms of such practice and behaviour. I think we all see it in our day-to-day practice. We've seen it so many times, how doctors, nurses, pharmacists are constantly getting abused, and by patients as well as families. And also that leads on to the pressures within the fellow work colleagues as well, really. And that does have an impact on the analysis and the intervention that you may ultimately put out.
Like, yeah, I enjoyed it, although, yeah, it wasn't the easiest paper to read, and I may have missed a couple of things, but I think you just mentioned it then, Mahendra, was they talked about unacceptable behaviours and their performance-related consequences may often be more automatic than reflective in nature. So they're talking about it being a system one activity than a system two. So what they're talking about there is that sometimes poor behaviour is automatic behaviour, because almost that's how people have either been trained or probably been conditioned to behave, because that's the culture they're in. And I think that's what you're saying, isn't it? Is that we've got some toxic cultures out there where bad behavior may not be perceived as bad behavior by people because it's the norm. And then the other thing that I liked, and you just mentioned that phrase as well, I didn't like this phrase. It said, instead, it's likely to be necessary to nip unacceptable behaviors in the bud, stopping contagion by addressing the root causes of unacceptable behavior. Now, I sort of get what they're saying, but what they don't mention in this paper is the role of poor management or poor leadership. And I think this editorial is suggesting it's the behavior of the individuals that needs to be nipped in the bud. Whereas I think there's something in the intervention that needs to recognize the fact that the cause of this as healthcare professionals, we're not trained in management, or we never used to be. And so often clinicians are in positions of high influence over their colleagues, yet they've had no training in that behavior. So I think they did touch on it in terms of what they suggested. There was some sort of intervention based on some American teamwork type program that I didn't quite get. But I think there's something about the outcome of a paper like this is, you know, we need to take more seriously how we develop our professionals as managers.
The thing I took from it most, and I agree, it was quite hard on first read. I had to go back and read it a couple of times. But I was reflecting on the fact, look, I spent 31 years, I think, working in the NHS. And a bit like when I asked Mahendra earlier, have we moved on in relation to inequalities and access? I'm thinking, have we moved on in relation to the amount that I have witnessed of bad behaviour, as it calls it? And I think the answer to that is yes. I think the NHS is a lot less hierarchical than it used to be. So I often talk about how I was a pharmacist, a relatively young, inexperienced pharmacist, but the thought of almost speaking up to a senior consultant was a really big thing. And if you think about one of our heroes, Gimmo, Atul Gawande, he and the World Health Organization brought in the surgical safety checklist. And really, one of the reasons why they brought that in was that they knew that culturally, in a surgical operating theatre, it's very hard for the operating theatre assistant or the scrub nurse to speak up to this on a pedestal, most successful cardiothoracic surgeon or whatever. And I think that's what this is about, isn't it? It's saying that actually, if you have a hierarchical structure and people are allowed to get away with bad behavior, then that may actually cause harm to patients, because that's what this is about, isn't it? And although the paper says, look, it was a systematic review, and we can't say fundamentally there's very, very clear evidence, they're saying that there's enough but mid-moderate quality studies that suggest that it can actually have an effect on how often things go wrong. And so it makes me think of the surgical safety checklist, which is essentially what Atul Gawande has taken forward.
Yeah, lots of those systematic review articles were from surgery, so from all across the globe. So that was worth pointing out. Come back to Gimmo's point about it is about individual behavior, though. It's how we react as individuals. And when you're coaching people, some of the questions that I would ask them, I say, are you rewarding to deal with? How do I feel after an interaction with you? And so there's that, that shadow of leadership that we talk about. And so Megan Wrights is one of the authorities on speaking truth to power, and she talks about the 3 traps in listening up. So we encourage people to speak up, but we don't always encourage our leaders to be good listeners. And so the 3 traps in listen up, she suggests, we forget how scary we are. So there's that hierarchical intimidation aspect. We don't question or are not aware of our little list of whose opinion counts. So we have the people that, bring us solutions and the other people that bring us niggles and problems. And then the last one, look, we send shut up, not speak up signals. And so she talks about this, don't tell me that you've got an open door policy. My office is always open. That tells me 2 things. A, you've got an office. and B, I come to you. And so she's published extensively on this, and it is well worth a read. And then the other things that, again, Gimmo will be aware of some of these things. Look, the chimp paradox from Steve Peters, about why the red mist descends. And you see that all over the workplace. You see it and we see it in society as well. But it is those individual reactions to situations that then they escalate up the conflict staircase. So people have a discrepancy. If it becomes polarized, then there's a dance to the top of that conflict staircase very, very quickly. And at the top of the staircase is war and destruction. So if you go into, and Gimmo, I've been into surgeries where this has happened, we can see that there's discord between the nursing team and the medical team. And then you just don't quite get something. And then you ask them, they said, tell me about your Christmas party. And they go, which one? Well, is that the nursing Christmas party or is it the medical Christmas party? So you get to hear about those fractures that are out there and where people are at war and destruction. And when you hear about, and we've had our fair share in Wales about some of these cultural things that have gone wrong in some of our hospitals, that's what you find, some of the things about the midwives and the consultants. This was a midwife-run unit. Consultants were not welcome on here. That type of language is at the top of the conflict staircase.
Can I just add on, if I may? The other thing that I found interesting about this paper was how it was looking at negative interpersonal reactions as an iatrogenic effect, and to actually quantify that. So whether just like as a negative effect from a drug that you get as well from medicine, and how the impact on the outcome as a result of the final outcome that we'd want to look for, really. And they thought that such behaviour could explain nearly 40% of the variance in therapeutic outcomes in terms of parameters such as timeliness of diagnosis, etc., really. So that's an interesting take as well. So we talk about systems that they didn't mention, but actually I like that bit about, is this an iatrogenic effect is equal to, because of the impact that it has on people, really.
Yeah, and just for the non-health, when we say iatrogenic, we kind of mean harm caused inadvertently by the treatment, essentially.
Yes.
A few other bits to add. Look, and Gimmo might remember this again, back in about 10 years ago now in Wales, we had presentations from our then Chief Medical Officer, and they introduced us to the case of Justin Michelesi from the States. And there's a quote in there that and her son tragically went into surgery. Look at, first thing in the morning, by 7:55 a.m. he was dead. And her quote was, "When it came to time for my son's surgery, you remove the chaos." And so that's where the public and the patients are expecting us to get our stuff together and to put those but it's, as I say, it doesn't happen like that. So a quick quiz. Let's finish with a quiz on a more upbeat note. Who said words are, of course, the most powerful drug used by mankind?
Julian Tudor-Hart.
Rudyard Kipling. Slightly easier one for you. Words are like weapons. They wound sometime.
William Shakespeare.
Share. Very good. And look, a quote from the Gosport report is, "There should be no place in modern healthcare for the bully, prima donna, micromanager, egomaniac, or narcissist." A big thank you to Mahendra for joining us on the Oral Apothecary and for sharing his stories, his drug of emotional connection, his career anthem, and his book for the Oral Apothecary Library. Coming up next time, we'll be joined by Dr. Wasim Bakir. Wasim is a senior pharmacist from the Pharmacy Integration Programme at NHS England and is a member of the Health Foundation's Q Network. He has a passion for personalised care and shared decision-making, especially in complex situations like care homes and frail elderly. We look forward to catching up with Waz next time on the Oral Apothecary. You can contact us via Twitter at Oral Apothecary or on LinkedIn, and you can email us at oralapothecarypod@gmail.com. Over to Gimmo now for the final ingredient.
Hey, thank you from me as well, Mahendra. That was fantastic. So continue our theme of non-drug related interventions. So do you guys consider yourselves optimists or pessimists? Do you tend to see the glass as half full rather than half empty? If so, you may be surprised to learn that this tendency can actually be good for your health. So this was in this week's The Conversation, a sort of science website. A number of studies have shown that optimists enjoy higher levels of well-being, better sleep, lower stress, and even better cardiovascular health and immune function. And a recent study has shown that being an optimist is linked to longer life. So to conduct this study, researchers tracked the lifespan of nearly 160,000 women aged between 50 and 79 for a period of 26 years. And in 2019, the researchers followed up with the participants who were still living and looked at the lifespan of participants who died. And what they found is those who had the highest levels of optimism were more likely to live longer. More importantly, the optimists were also more likely to live into their 90s, which we refer to as exceptional longevity. So I think the average life of a woman is 83 years. So it was a remarkable finding. And a study looking at men found similar results. But what they found was that not only did optimists maintain a healthy lifestyle, which could contribute to the being, but they also managed stressful situations better. So they were better at using adaptive coping strategies that helped them resolve the source of stress or view situations in a less stressful way. So all of this led to reduction in the stress hormone cortisol, which we know has an impact on heart disease and the immune system. So in short, the way optimists deal with stress protects them against the harmful effects of cortisol and helps people to live longer. So there you have it. Maybe Monty Python was right. Always look on the bright side of life.
This was a 3 Apothecaries production. Sound engineer, Jimbo Slough. Original music, Jamie Brewster. Artwork by David Baker.
Thanks for listening to the Oral Apothecary podcast. It's all about pills, thrills and bellyaches.
This episode of the Oral Apothecary is sponsored by OneLessPill.com, a medicines optimization consultancy.